Welcome back to SoundLearn. Today we're going to learn about mixing, and no, not the technical stuff. You're probably wondering, why is there no cool plugins or beep boop beeps and faders and all that stuff? It's because I think there's a ton of tutorials for that kind of stuff, and I probably will do some tutorials about that stuff myself. But I notice a lot of people, when they're starting out, they just go and watch the tutorial, follow it verbatim without understanding what they're doing, and they still complain like, why do my mixes still not sound good? Well, it's because you don't understand the concepts behind it. That's the important part, all right? You can't get anywhere by just copy and pasting a thing you saw on the internet. You can't get like that through life, right? I'm going to break it down into a few little topics, and hopefully it doesn't get too boring. So let's just get straight into it. The first thing I always try to do when I'm starting a mix is I try to have an idea of what kind of space I'm trying to build for a mix. You have to think of your track like it's living inside of a real space, or not real. It doesn't have to be real. You could be in a giant cave, add a ton of reverb and stuff, but it's important to think of your music as living inside of a space. You should be able to put on a pair of headphones, close your eyes, and visualize the space that the music is living inside of. It doesn't have to necessarily sound like a live performance, but think of it as though you're putting a band, even if it's all electronic, inside of a space and transporting yourself there. Where is everybody on stage, if there is a stage? If it's a space, are you in a real space? Are you in a tiny bathroom where it's like really echoey and reverby? Or is it a giant cave, like I said, like where you're just going to hear it bounce back after seconds and seconds have passed? All that stuff is not super necessary. You don't have to have it super defined, but it's a good idea to already have a concept of where you want to take the song, because that'll help you creatively and also technically, because there's something to base it off of. That's first thing I think about. Next thing I think about is who is important in the song. There's going to be plenty of tracks, I'm sure. Is it the vocals? Is it the guitar? Is it the synth? Is it the drums? Is it a purely electronic song that's really minimal? These are things to think about, because you can start building your mix based off of that. A lot of people just dive straight in, and then they just start kind of mixing everything together, and they're not even focused on like who is the important. Everyone's always excited. That's like, man, I can't believe I recorded that sick guitar part. But is that sick guitar part what's going to make people love that song, or is it more of a background sort of layer that's going to help, set the tone? So I like to think of my mixes happening in 4 different stages. That's how I usually break it down. And I tend to spend no more than 15 to 20 minutes doing each one. And this is about just moving quickly and just feeling it out, not worrying too much about the technical mix aspect. But it helps a ton. And when you're done with these 4 stages, you generally will have a way better mix than you had when you started. Stage 1 is gain staging. Right? And that is basically trying to get your levels to be playing nicely with each other. This goes back to what I was saying. Who's the leader here? Is it the vocals? Is it the guitar? Is it the drums? You're going to want to leave those at a nice level to where you have enough room for the others to go below that. And also, when everything's playing, you're not clipping out. When I do this, I tend to start with the rhythmic section. I like to just do, if it's a more traditional song, I like to get the kick, snare, and the bass working together really nicely. And you should feel like the groove is inherent. It should make you want to move. If you can't get that done in the mix, then you might just be working on a song that's not, where it needs to be, and maybe you need to go back to the production stage. But if you can get a nice groove to where you can literally just have a kick, snare, maybe a hi-hat, and a bass, and that kind of already makes you kind of start bobbing your head, you're in a great place. So now start building around that. You can introduce the hook instrument, whether that's the vocals, the guitar, synth, whatever it may be. And if you get those kind of like 4 little elements jiving together really, really well, you're going to notice very quickly that everything you add around it is going to be what's going to just really give it life and fill it. But you already have a great base. You want to build a strong foundation, and I usually do it around there. And that's done with gain staging. This is before touching anything. Just make sure your levels are right. I like to start lower and build my way up, always making sure that I'm not peaking. And when everything's added all together, We're nowhere near 0. We don't want to peak up there. Cool? Second part of the stage of these 4 different stages is panning. Where in the space are these instruments? I've got the levels down. They sound pretty good together. But now I can open it up even more and create more space for them by panning. And I like to, again, visualize this as like a 3D sort of thing. I close my eyes and I think, where is this guitar? Is it dead center? Okay, well, cool. The bass is dead center too. Whereas the standing behind the bassist, you start very quickly realizing how crowded a virtual stage can get if you're thinking about it that way. So even if it means moving the guitar slightly to the left or to the right, you've already created some space there. And same thing with the keyboard player. Do you want to have him right next to the guitar, more to the right, more to the left? You want to kind of think of these things and start spreading them out. And something I see very commonly a lot of people do, and it kind of can become a problem really quickly, is that the moment everyone discovers about stereo recording or doubling guitars and stuff and panning them hard left and hard right, that's a cool trick and it works. But if you're going to do that, make sure you are kind of intending for those to be the things that are living in the hard left and hard right, because you're already taking away a lot of space. I like to sometimes leave it somewhere in between hard left and hard right. And that helps a lot because that gives me more space to put stuff in the full left and full right and stuff like that. So think about those things. Make space through panning. So the third stage for me is frequency spectrum, which is a fancy way of saying EQing. This is where we get to add color to the different tracks and carve out even more space for instruments to live and work together. So as a general overview, humans can only hear from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, right? And so we have that whole frequency spectrum to play with. But more realistically, a lot of the instruments that you're going to be recording and samples that you might be using are going to all generally share similar sort of frequency spaces. I like to break it up into lows, low mids, mids, high mids, and highs. Generally, those are the kind of areas that you can actually work with, and it's best to think of them like that. So when you think of a bass guitar, you're going to be like, is this in the lows or in the low mids? It's actually kind of in both. And so you kind of assign that instrument to that spectrum. You're like, cool, there's one living there. And we have guitars. Where is that going to be? It's going to be more in my mid range to sometimes even high range if you have a certain tone, or mid highs. So you place it there. Now, I'm just giving you a general visual idea of like where you would start placing these different instruments without even touching anything yet. But you want to sort of assign different ranges to different instruments. Reason being is because you don't want all the instruments fighting for the same range because it gets muddy really, really quick. So while an electric guitar recording might have a really nice low end and you want to accent that, don't forget that the bass is also taking care of a lot of that and probably playing the same note that sounded nice on the guitar there. So you don't have to completely kill it, but you can definitely cut some EQ there and let the bass handle that. You don't want to get too caught up in having one instrument in particular or every track in particular sound great on its own, because I see this a lot. A lot of people are like, dude, it's so weird. I got this guitar and it sounds great when I solo it, but when I unmute it or unsolo it and I listen to the whole mix, it just sounds crazy. I don't hear it anymore, or it's gone, or it sounds uglier. It's because you have to remember that you're basically conducting an orchestra here. That's all you're doing as a mixer. You've got all these tracks to work with and you're making sure that they're all playing nice together and getting together in harmony. And so sometimes that means knowing when to turn stuff down and cut out EQs, which leads me to my next point. You always want to start by using subtractive EQ instead of boosting stuff. A lot of people, when they first start, use EQs to boost all the frequencies that they think sound best, and they kind of just start adding everything on. And again, you're messing with the frequency spectrum a lot there, and you're not carving out space for those instruments. You're adding more noise. And there's nothing wrong with additive EQ. In fact, you will need it eventually in the mixing process. But when you're starting out and setting like the foundation for the mix, you're going to want to use subtractive EQ. Like I said, If a guitar has some nice low end, you have to ask yourself, is the bass already handling that for me? Should I be worrying about that low end? Sometimes if you cut out that low end, you'll see the bass comes through a lot more because now it has space. It doesn't have to fight for that frequency range. So you're going to now carve out space. It's all about carving out space and creating that kind of like visual space for them to live on. It's almost like a stage. Stage 4, which is now giving it depth, giving every track depth. So you've got, as of right now, if you were to visualize it, you've got your flat sort of stage and everybody's standing up in front, like right in front of the audience. And so you've got your singer, your guitar, your bass, your synths, etc., etc. You maybe got them all spread out. They've got their volumes all tuned in to where they need to be. Everything's sounding pretty good, but you might think this still sounds a little flat. I've got the EQs, everybody's like nice and mixed, but it still sounds a little flat. This is where you have to, again, go back to thinking about the space that you wanted to put this song in. And we're just used to hearing stuff in real spaces in real life. The reality is that anytime you talk in a room, your voice travels across the room until it hits something. Usually it's a wall, maybe it's a tree outside, but it hits something and then it bounces back and you're going to hear what's called a reflection. When you hear that reflection, you kind of immediately register the space you're in, how big it is, how small it is. It's actually how somebody who's blind can get around using a walking stick. They're hitting the ground, creating noise to hear how that sound reverberates around where they're at. And so they can tell when something's right in front of them or further away or when they're in a bigger open space. And you have to use those concepts when you're mixing because that's going to give a sense of depth and space to your mix. You don't want to go too crazy. You don't want to cake everything in reverb, obviously, but that is a way to kind of create depth. And so maybe there is like a nice little synth pad that you have that you only really want to feel. You don't want it to be something that's front and center that you hear. You can add a bit of a reverb with a pre-delay that makes it kind of start a little bit just behind everything else. So you've got a guitar or a drum that's very percussive and is very much impactful right on the grid. Maybe you want the pad a few milliseconds behind and it registers almost as if you were in a real space. If you imagine, standing down a long hallway and you snap your finger, you might actually see the person snapping their finger snap their finger before the sound actually gets to you. Another perfect example would be lightning. If lightning's far away enough, you see the lightning strike, it won't be until a few seconds that you'll actually hear the thunder, right? This is the same concept, except you're going to bring it down to a lot more of a minimal level, and it should be subtle, but it's going to make a huge difference in your mixes. You don't want to get to the point where it's something that's very obvious, unless that's something you're going for, but in general, giving reverbs and delays on your tracks subtly it's going to give texture and life to your mix. So those are kind of the 4 stages that I like to think about when I'm starting a mix. It helps build a really strong foundation to then get really technical and nitty gritty and get creative with like all sorts of effects and stuff like that. If you've got this kind of strong core, it's already going to make everything you do after that sound miles better than what you started with. And give it a shot. Try out different formats. Maybe you can flip the order of the stages around, whatever works for you. There's no right way to mix. This is just what has worked for me and things I've learned over the years. And I would love to hear what you guys think, how this works for you. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you think there's a different way to go about it. But this is just my opinion, my experience. So if you liked it, if you learned anything at all, please go ahead and like it. Leave a comment, ask me any questions you might have. Feel free to request any other tutorials. I'm trying to put out videos every week, so if you like this content, go ahead and subscribe, check it out. And thanks for listening.